Welcome, everyone, to Life Beyond 6 Feet. I'm Damien with RKB Paranormal. I'm joined by my co-host Josh.
What's
This
up?
week, this week, excuse me, this week we're taking a little bit of turn from the paranormal. This week we have a retired NYPD detective. He's author of multiple books. This week we have on Vic Ferrari. Vic, welcome to the show, buddy.
Guys, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. We're honored to have you on, man. And like I said, since Josh, you're in corrections, I'm going to kind of let you take the lead on this, and I'll just kind of jump in here and there.
So,
So,
so yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to thank you for your time, your service, your
absolutely.
career. We appreciate it very much. Um, so there again, what kind of got you started wanting to go the law enforcement route?
I grew up in New York City in the borough of the Bronx in the 70s, born in the mid 60s. As a child, I grew up watching the Rockford Files, the French Connection, the Seven Ups, cop shows, cop movies. When I was a little boy, my mother would take me to the movie theater on Saturdays, which was around the corner from the local police station. So I was just fascinated with the police cars, and I would run up to the cars and look inside and look at the equipment. I'd watch the cops outside the precinct and watch how they behaved, the way they rested their hands on the butt of their guns, the nightsticks. Just enamored with it. By about age 10, my friends and I used to go up to the local post office and steal the wanted posters and start wandering around the neighborhood with a bunch of 10-year-olds with stolen wanted posters looking for Billy Ray Jones wanted for bank robbery in Louisiana. We're walking around the Bronx, walking into delis like with these wanted posters, like that might be this guy. So I knew what I wanted to do from an early age. My parents really wanted me to go to college or learn a trade. I would have none of it. By 21, I took the police exam and went into the police academy, and I was on my way.
Man, that's awesome. And so, what what all different levels have you worked in? I know you retired as a detective. What other things did you do while you worked there?
Okay, so it's the police academy in New York City. Well, let me just give you a little background on the New York City Police Department. At any given time, there's 35 to 40,000 members.
Cool.
Oh wow.
So a police academy class can be from anywhere from 500 to 2,000 people. So we hire in bulk. So my academy class was considered mid-level. There was about 1,200 of us that graduated. New York City's got 9 million people, over 5 boroughs. There's 77 police stations in the 5 boroughs. That's not including narcotics and specialized units. So after the police academy, I was put in what's called field training. Back then, what they would do is they'd put 40, 50 rookies in a field training unit in a borough, and then they would sprinkle you out on foot posts throughout the South Bronx. And basically, it was baptism by fire. You learn the street. And if you had any questions, you called the supervisor who would show up. Things have changed. After my 6 months in field training, I went to a precinct in the South Bronx. It was a burned out. It was actually where they filmed the movie Fort Apache, the Bronx. But by the time I got there, it was called Little House on the Prairie because it was just all burnt out, abandoned buildings.
Mm.
There was a lot of guys there that were either had gotten jammed up or in trouble for a variety of things. A lot of them were old Vietnam vets that just didn't seem right. After about 6 months of there, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to spend the rest of my career here. I put in a transfer. I wound up going to a place called Bronx Task Force, which was a borough-wide unit. I was young and new, and they stuck me in DUI, which I absolutely hated. If you've ever dealt with drunks, there's no winning dealing with drunks on a daily basis. They either want to fight, they want to cry, they're happy, they get sick, they throw up. No one wants to lose their driver's license. I absolutely hated that. Went back to a precinct. I made numerous arrests. I got put in a plainclothes unit where I was driving around. It's called anti-crime, where you go after people breaking into cars, robberies in progress. You're not undercover, but you're in plain clothes in an unmarked car. So it gives you a second or two to watch a crime in progress before the bad guys catch on. After that, I went into Manhattan North Narcotics. I was on a team where we did buy and bust operations and search warrants in northern Manhattan. I did that for about 18 months. And my last 10 years, I was a detective in the NYPD's auto crime division. So uh, anything to do with chop shop, stolen cars, exporting of stolen cars out of the country, changing the vehicle identification numbers for resale, identity theft, acquiring stolen cars on phony credit histories and phony identities. In the early 90s, New York City averaged 150,000 stolen cars a year. So it was like
Oh,
shooting
wow.
fish in the barrel. If you knew what you were doing and knew what to look for, you were in a car chase at some point during the day if you wanted it. And I wanted it. I mean, that was always my thing. I was always a car guy. I grew up in a neighborhood where there was no shortage of car thieves. I worked in a gas station where guys were always coming in with stolen cars, either looking to sell the car, looking to sell parts, or get gasoline for the stolen cars. So I knew what to look for with the old GMs, with the old neck steering columns that have a bandana wrapped around it or a punched out vent window. So I was always a car guy, and I was lucky enough to work in a unit my last 10 years where I was able to put my knowledge to use.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And of course, you learned a lot as an early age of knowing what to look for. So it just kind of helped your career further down the road. You used all those little things you picked up over time to make your career better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I always wanted to get into the auto crime division, but it was one of the highly coveted units in the police department. And you were either really good at what you did, or your dad was a captain or above. Well, my dad was a butcher. I had no family in the police department. I didn't know anybody politically connected. So it took me 10 years to get there, but it wasn't from a lack of trying.
Right. And, it's sad to say, but there are a lot of police departments and sheriff's office and things, and politics always weighs heavy on those things.
Oh yeah, we had guys and girls that would come through that unit where they owned a lawn service and they were cutting a chief's lawn. And
Oh,
you know, we used to call it parachuting in because people would
yeah,
just show up. They're like, how did
right.
it didn't even come over the teletype? Like they just showed up with a box full of paperwork. Like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, sometimes the administration didn't even know who had a desk for this guy. He just would show up. Suddenly
Yeah.
we thought it was a joke, like someone was busting balls, like, let's see if I can pull this off.
So what was uh out of that last 10 years in that in that crime unit, what was probably your favorite catch or your favorite bust out of all that? Because
Oh, there was so many. I mean, and it
I
was
know
so
with me,
interesting. And I could
it's
tell you
kind of
story after story, but I could throw you a couple good ones. I worked on a case where we had Chinese nationals that had rented a warehouse in Brooklyn. And what they were doing was they were shipping 20 to 30 stolen Audi A6s a month to Shanghai.
Shit.
And the guy running it was a Chinese military intelligence officer. And what he did was he hooked up with a Jamaican middleman from the Bronx. The Jamaican middleman knew all these car thieves. He had several SEAL teams. And basically, the Chinese were paying the Jamaican guy $5,000 an Audi, and then the Jamaican guy was paying the thieves, depending on the thief and his relationship, anywhere between $1,000 and $500 a car. And they were stealing, like I said, 20 to 30 Audis a month. They were hitting dealerships over the weekend. They were grabbing cars off the street, and the cars would go into shipping containers in this warehouse. The first two cars would go into the shipping container. They would take the air out of the tires so the car would sit lower in the container. Then they would build a wooden ramp above it, and they would drive a car or two above it so they could maximize the space in the container. They put 3, 4 Audis, stolen Audis, in the container. Then a trucking company that had no idea what was going on would take the container to New Jersey. From New Jersey, they would get put on trains and railed. I believe it was Long Beach, California, and then they were put on ships and shipped to the Pacific Rim. So it was a complex case with like I said, with 35,000 NYPD members, we have unlimited resources. So we had Chinese cops monitoring the wiretaps on the Asians. We had Spanish cops monitoring the wiretaps on the car thieves because most of them were Spanish. So while we've got this international car theft ring going, we realized that our thieves are in the murder for hire business. They're
oh,
bragging
nice.
about hits and murders they did. So I mean, when we took that case down, in addition to, I mean, these guys were like that movie Heat, they were into everything. They were doing
Yeah.
large-scale commercial burglaries. They were hitting dealerships, and they were in the murder for hire business. If you had the money, they'd shoot somebody for you. So we were able to solve, or at least be sure, about 15 homicides they did, and a lot of them went to jail for homicide. And then the Asians were arrested for enterprise corruption, which is the state charge of racketeering. It was a good case. We didn't recover a lot of the cars because we recovered the cars that were on their way to China, but we didn't get a lot of them back.
So how long does it take to work a case like that to be able to get to that point where you're like, boom, we got them. Let's go take them down like right now.
Well, we wanted it. We casted a net, and we wanted to see who was going to wander onto the playing field, how big this was. You don't.
Right.
If we just would have raced in the first day and grabbed everybody, you really don't know. We wouldn't have ever solved the murders. You know what I mean? We wouldn't have known about the murders, and we wouldn't have had much leverage on these guys. If we grab a couple of guys for a couple of stolen cars, and they're only looking at a couple of years, they're not going to give up a homicide. It's just not worth it to them. They'll chance going to court. This case, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. If you watch TV on television, that Judge Janine Pirro, we did that case with the Westchester County DA's office, and they were a smaller unit. They only had a couple of investigators, and when they brought us on board, it was just, we were able to pool our resources together and just keep getting, the net just kept getting bigger and bigger. Actually, a couple of cops got fired in that case because what became apparent was there were two cops in a precinct that were friends with the car thieves. And what the car thieves would do from time to time is they'd steal motorcycles, they'd chop up the bikes and give these two cops a motor, plastic fairings, a motorcycle helmet. And what the cops would do is, when these thieves would say, hey, can you run this plate for me? Because they might have seen a car they wanted to steal, and the cops would run the plate for them. And then they would go to this person's house and steal the car. So the two cops lost their jobs as a result of that case. But I mean, shame on them for getting into bed with these guys. You know what I mean? These guys were, in addition to being thieves, they were murderers.
Wow. I mean, and that's the cool part about detective work is, you get information and you start, chewing after this one little thing. And next thing you know, that one little case sometimes can lead into 5, 6, 7 different areas of things and end up solving a whole bunch of problems just off of one little bitty piece of something.
Oh, yeah. And these guys, I mean, when you think about it, like the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, I mean, these guys were stealing so many Audis that they literally started depleting the 5 boroughs and the surrounding counties of Audis. I mean, that's how crazy this was and how long it was going on for, to the point where the main thief, this guy Mario, and we picked this up on the wiretap. Mario was, in addition to being a car thief, he used to be a parking attendant at Upper East Side of Manhattan parking garage. So we picked this up on the wiretap. He goes to one of his friends, a former coworker. He says, listen, how about we do this? How about me and about 10 guys, we swing by the garage on Tuesday night. We'll put you in the trunk of the car. We'll put you in the trunk of a car. We'll duct tape you. And we'll take 10 cars and give us about 20 minutes, then start banging on the trunk. Someone will call 911. I'll give you $5,000 and we could take 10 cars. And that's what they did. And we had a camera outside the garage. We watched them walk in. We watched the cars come out. 20 minutes later, the 911 call comes. The precinct cops respond. The garage attendant's in the trunk. He starts telling them this bullshit story about, I don't know, wearing ski masks, which he knew everybody. And by the time that 911 call came in on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, all those Audis were already in that garage. Well, they stole a couple other cars besides Audis, but all those cars were in that garage in Brooklyn with the gate down. I mean, that's how professional it was done. But ultimately, what unraveled that case actually got blown up because they brought a couple of flunkies because they stole so many cars at once. They brought a couple of jackasses along for the ride. And you hear on the wiretap, the main thief, Mario, asking one of his lieutenants, like, did you make sure those cars don't have like a GPS or low jack? And the guy goes, yeah. He goes, you sure you swept the cars? He goes, yeah. He goes, don't yeah me. Tell me. He goes, yeah. Don't worry about it. Well, they didn't. And unbeknownst to us, the following morning, the owner goes to the parking garage. His car isn't there. he files a police report, which activates a LoJack. The LoJack starts pinging in this garage in Brooklyn. And the unit I worked in is called the Auto Crime Division, but we fell under what's called OCCB, the Organized Crime Control Bureau. We don't tell precinct cops what we're doing. Our whole mission is to keep the precinct cops out of, because you just don't know. Like I spoke to earlier, we had 2 dirty cops that are running plays. You don't know if there's a couple of precinct cops that know what's going on in that garage and might tip off the bad guys. I mean, with 35,000 NYPD members, there's always going to be a few bad apples. So what happens is that LoJack is pinging in that garage. The local precinct cops decide to run into the garage, and they see a bunch of Chinese guys standing around, and the Chinese had built a false wall. So when you first come in, you couldn't see the stolen cars. So they go, wait a minute, what's going on in here? The Asians told them, I think it was a toy factory, and they lit out of there. They ran out. And now the phones are blowing up. You know, they're running away from that garage. They're never going back. The precinct cops find the stolen cars. So now we had to round everybody up within hours. I mean, we were getting phone calls. You know, we grabbed 2 of the Chinese guys coming out of an alleyway. They had plane tickets in their pockets, suitcases packed. I mean, this is literally like an hour or 2 after that place got blown up. We grabbed these guys. They had plane tickets to Toronto. So we were just lucky we got everybody in a couple of hours, but very easily we could have lost half the players.
Oh, absolutely, because they already had planned on all that. You know, this is what we're going to do when this happens, so we can get the heck up out of here.
Yeah, we had them, especially the factory workers. We had photos of them. We knew what block they lived on, approximately what building they lived in, what they looked like, but we didn't have them ID'd. Like, we had the thieves ID'd, and we had a couple of the Asians running the thing ID'd. Well, as far as the information they provided to get into the country, which a lot of it was false. But the guys working in the warehouse, like, we just had photos of them. You know what I mean? We didn't know anything, so they would have been gone. You know what I mean?
Easy.
Yeah. We had nothing on them other than, video and surveillance photos.
So you had, sounds like, a ton of fun working in this division, really. Especially, that being kind of a thing that you were really interested in. One of those other sides of things is homicide. How many homicide cases were you a part of or had to help work in accordance to what you were doing, even in a whole nother division?
Well, I wasn't so, all right, the NYPD works like this. So say a police station, someone gets found in the trunk of a car, right? The precinct cops respond, and they're going to work it. So detectives in a precinct work everything, in an NYPD precinct work everything from domestic assaults to bounce checks to homicides, right? If they don't solve that after a couple of days, each borough has a borough homicide unit. So if someone gets killed in the Bronx homicide helps the precinct detectives. That's all they do. Bronx homicide, or Manhattan North homicide, or Brooklyn South homicide. That's all they do. Now, in organized crime control, like in that particular case where they're bragging about hits, right? We start gathering information. Will we work the homicide to a degree? That's not our avenue of expertise. We will bring them in because, if you fuck up a stolen car case, you're kind of pissed off, but okay. If you fuck up a homicide case, you're letting a murderer get away. So you really, you know what I mean? There's you're not too proud to bring those guys in or even let them take it from you, because you really don't want that bad guy to get away. Especially a murder. Like I said, if you fuck up a car case, well, it's bad, but we how many? Oh, plenty. I mean, a lot of, especially like our Brooklyn and Queens teams, the body shops and junkyards out in Brooklyn were run by mobsters. The Italian mafia, one of the 5 families, and those guys were involved in hits all the time. So they dealt with that a lot more than us up in the Bronx and Manhattan. But enough homicides. I mean, like I said, I've been involved in a bunch of them investigation-wise, but that really wasn't my forte. But probably, like, my fingers touched, I don't know, 20 or so.
Yeah. Wow. And so, that's kind of where I was leading into, because, man, I know that there's got to be some times that you went out to some of these places, and you had to have come across some things that were just a little odd sometimes, things that maybe you couldn't really explain. And so that's where some of my questioning is leading into is how many times do you think, and of course it's going to be difficult to have that specific number, that maybe you're out somewhere dealing with something and you start dealing with something that's going on that you can't really explain, kind of on the paranormal side of stuff.
Well, I've seen some really spooky shit. Well, it starts with when you're in the police academy. I don't know what they do now, but 35 years ago, they take you to the morgue.
Oh.
So on our day, we went to the morgue. They took a group of 30 of us, and we went to Bellevue Hospital, which is where the Manhattan morgue is. And I thought it was going to be like on an episode of Quincy, like there'd be one or two tables and one or two people in lab coats. It looked like a Jiffy Lube or a service center. Like there was metal slab after metal slab, like fucking 10 of them, right? And between each slab is a produce scale. Like, remember when you were a kid, you go to the grocery store and your mother would weigh like a head of lettuce or something in that produce scale? Yeah, that's where they would weigh the organs, right? And I mean, there was like 6 or 8 autopsies going on in one shot when I walked in there. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, you got a guy with a whizzer tool that you would cut muffler pipe, or nowadays they're doing it to steal catalytic converters. He's sawing the back of someone's skull. They're taking the brain out. They're putting it in the fucking produce scale. And I'm just watching this. I'm like, holy shit. Like, you want to talk about like something bigger than you. And I mean, that was like my first taste of death in the police academy. And there was like some guy that was shot like numerous times. And the detective's talking to the medical examiner. He goes, what do you think? And the medical examiner goes, suspicious suicide. And they're all laughing. You know what I mean? So it was like, that was like my first introduction to like, what the fuck is this? You know what I mean? And then early in my career, I remember my partner and I were there's an abandoned dump in the Bronx, and the fire department was coming back from a fire, and there's this little Toyota Corolla. This is like 1989, the summer of '89. There's this little Toyota Corolla burning just outside the dump, and we pulled up. And the fire department puts the fire out. It was a front interior fire. And they pop open the trunk, and there's 2 guys duct taped in the trunk.
Shit.
Right. And one guy's blinking, so he's alive. We pull him out of the trunk, but he's basically brain dead. And what we figured out was whoever did this, they were alive in that trunk. They got driven there. They opened the trunk. They shot them there because we found the shell casings right at the scene. They shut the trunk with the 2 guys in it. They thought they were dead, and then set the front of the car on fire. But we were like, can you imagine, like, you're in the trunk, and it's a Toyota Corolla, and these are pretty big guys. So like they were really smushed in there, So like, Jesus, what was their mindset like, to get shoved in that trunk, driven all the way over there in the middle of nowhere, shot. And if that's not bad enough, they shut the trunk and set the car on fire. I mean, I was another time I walked in on a woman who had just been basically decapitated. That's a wild story. 2 cops in my precinct killed the guy that did it. But when we walked into the apartment seconds after she was killed, I mean, we were walking around. There was so much blood because he decapitated her, and the cops shot the guy that did it. He was dead on the floor. So there was so much blood in that room. We were walking around like literally your feet were sticking to the carpet. It was just like saturated in blood. Yeah, so like the whole apartment was, like I said, my feet were just sticking to the floor, was sloshing around in blood. Then another homicide I walked in was this kid basically stabbed his mother to death, and then he left, changed his clothes, he got rid of the murder weapon, and then he came back and he left the door open, and no one discovered his mother. So then he had to start the ball rolling, calling 911 and pretending like he found her like that. And, I mean, in the end, I mean, he stabbed this poor woman to death numerous times with a carving knife. And I mean, you do see a lot of crazy shit as a cop, and especially, with 9 million people in New York City, there's no end to it. And I mean, I was down at 9/11. That was something wild because, by that point in my career, I had like 13 or 14 years in. I had seen quite a bit. But I mean, to see like the destruction down there the first day, nobody really knew what to make of it. I mean, you're walking around and there's all that dust blowing around. the sun can barely get through the particles. And, it was like that movie Planet of the Apes when Charlton Heston at the end of the movie goes to the beach and he sees the Statue of Liberty head there. And he's like, what the fuck? It was the same for us. We get down there and the facade of the Empire, World Trade Center is sticking into the ground. So it's one of those things where you're like, wow, this is a lot larger than me.
Right. And see, I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be one of my questions. If you were there, like when that happened, not when it happened, but how soon after the first plane hit did you get down there?
I was down there with my team probably about 1:30 walking around. I had court that day. I was supposed to be literally blocks from the World Trade Center. What saved my life was my sergeant was running late. That morning, I came in at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was supposed to be down in court, Manhattan Criminal Court, by 9 a.m. I had locked up this guy for a couple of stolen cars, and to wiggle out of going to jail, he was going to become an informant and give us a guy that was working in Department of Motor Vehicles that was pumping out driver's licenses. So we were going to have what's called a proffer hearing with the district attorney, his attorney, and see what he could provide would be worthwhile of us springing him out of jail. And we were supposed to be down there by 9 a.m. My office is in the Bronx, which is about a good 45 minutes to an hour away by the time you get down there in parking. So you had to leave by 7:30, no later than 7:30 to get down there. Well, my sergeant comes breezing into the office about 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, dude, what the fuck? We got to get down there. And he's like, yeah. He was running late and he's farting around the office. And I'm getting on his ass about we got to get down there. Well, the first plane hits. And our office was upstairs from a housing police precinct. So one of the cops runs upstairs and says, put on the news, a plane just hit the Trade Center. So we put on the television, we're watching it. And there's 3 airports around New York City, not including like the smaller ones like Teterboro. So we figured like a private pilot had a heart attack and hit the side of the building. It's happened before with the Empire State Building. And then the next thing you know, we're watching this and the second plane hits. I'm like, oh shit, this is terrorism. I mean, I worked the 93 World Trade Center bombing. So I mean, you work in New York, you see enough of this, you're kind of prepared for everything. So they told us, all right, everybody sit tight, put your uniform on and just wait for the call. And we all drove down there. And like I said, we were down there wandering around Broadway and Lower Manhattan by 1:30 in the afternoon.
Jeez.
Wow.
So I do want to ask, do you believe in the paranormal?
It's funny. I didn't know at first, but I mean, the older I get, and you see it a lot now with these UFO shows, and obviously the federal government believes there's something to it because they wouldn't go at these lengths to suppress things. So, do I think it's what we think it is? Probably not. But is there something out there that we just can't put our finger on? Yeah, I think there's something. I think there's some type of science or technology that we're not aware of. You know what I mean? It's beyond our ability to process.
Right. And see, that's one of the reasons we like to investigate because we don't know the answers to this stuff. So with all this tragedy and death that you've seen, do you think these tragic acts would leave an impression where it happens to where, say, this place could be haunted by this murder victim, or like the World Trade Center could be haunted by all the people that was killed there? What is your take on that?
That's a really good question. I never really gave it thought. Well, look at it this way. I wouldn't rent the apartment where that woman was decapitated and her boyfriend / assailant was killed by a couple of my coworkers. I wouldn't want to rent that apartment no matter what they were renting it for.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? I'll sit here and say no, but at the same time, it's the same as God. You know what I mean? I went to Catholic high school. I'm Catholic. And I have my doubts. I always like to say I've reached out to God on several occasions. Sometimes he answers my prayers. Other times it goes directly to voicemail. So I'm not sure if he exists, but I'm definitely afraid of him. If that's the best way I can answer your question.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. I'm like you. I don't think I'd want to rent that apartment, even if I didn't believe in the paranormal. Just knowing what happened there would just shy me away from it just automatically.
I guess my answer would be I don't know.
Never had nothing just reach out and grab you enough to say, yeah, that's 100% what I believe in.
Yeah, not yet. And I hope if there is something that's going to reach out, it misses me.
Right.
So when did you decide to start writing all these different books about your time with the force?
I retired after 20 years. I moved down to Florida. I got a job with the police department down in Florida. And it was like, I went from working as a detective in the world's largest police department to back on the road, a small police department, dealing with drunks and domestics. And by that point, being on the road as a cop is a young man's game. By that point, I really didn't want to hear people's problems anymore. And I said, you know what, this isn't working. So I re-retired. And so many of my friends said, you got all these wild stories about your NYPD career. You should start writing books. And I said, well, I don't know. I didn't know how the reception was going to be by my peers. And I said, if I am going to write these books, the two things I don't want to do is I don't want to get anybody in trouble or embarrassed, and I don't want to get anybody divorced.
Right.
Sometimes some of the best stories I can't write about. But I put out my first book, NYPD Through the Looking Glass, Stories from Inside America's Largest Police Department. And I was like, well, let's see what happens. And it started selling. And I was like, wow, and then I realized, there's really a market for this. And I've written 4 NYPD themed books, and I've written a book. My last book, Confessions of a Catholic High School Graduate, it's about my career going to Catholic high school and growing up in the Bronx, and what led me to my NYPD career, and how I was a smart ass punk kid, and how Catholic school and getting kicked in the ass a couple of times really straightened me out. It just turned into a cottage industry. And I think you guys, you work in law enforcement. And I think anybody in law enforcement has stories to tell. You got to keep at it. Try not to write in chronological order, but there's a market for it. And it just kind of took off for me.
So when you sit down to write one of these books, how long does it typically take you to write one? Is it you just start banging on the keyboard and it just starts coming out? Do you have it done in what seems like no time, or do you kind of take your time to make sure it's good and accurate and it's going to be a good book?
It takes me a year from the time I start writing. I'll write about 230, 240 pages of content. Then I go through it countless times. I keep rereading it and editing it and taking things out and tweaking it. Then then I have a company that does a copy edit. They send it back to me and I have to agree to the changes. Then I send it back to them. They do a proofread. It comes back to me. I've got to read it again. It takes me about a year from the time I start writing to the time I upload it to the Amazon platform.
Wow. Didn't really think it would take that long to I don't think I was that much involved in it, actually.
My books are about anywhere between 50 and 60,000 words.
Yeah.
That's all. And they got to make sense, and they kind of got to tie together. I mean, I'm lucky enough. My books are just short stories. My books, there's no beginning, middle, end. My book is a chapter. So in one of my books, I've got a chapter called NYPD's Flying Circus. I have a chapter called Crossing Over to the Dark Side. And that chapter is strictly 5 or 6 stories about police corruption, either guys I work with that went bad or famous crew that went bad. I just have chapters in there with another chapter about practical jokes that cops play on each other all the time. My books tend to be more upbeat about the ridiculous things and characters I dealt with in my career, but there's dark shit in there too.
Right. So throughout all of your years, what's probably the one case that will always stick with you, whether it be homicide or cars or drugs, whatever it is?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, I know what you're saying, because the movies always show there's like a detective sitting there scratching his head and time is running out and they're not going to solve that case. There's just so many, where it just got, too big. Or I guess the case with the A6s, because although we did cast a wide net and catch a lot of people involved, it was bigger. There was a couple of things in that case that we never got to the bottom of. Like, if memory serves me correctly, during that case, a couple of the Chinese guys went to Atlantic City, and they were smart. They were cautious. They didn't say much on the phone. They said just enough. But we're pretty sure there might have been a homicide in Atlantic City that they were linked to, but we couldn't prove it. But I mean, there was just so much going on. You know, with the NYPD, it's like you try to do the best job you can and move on, because it's shoveling sand against the tide. It really is. With 9 million people and all this shit and scams going on there, I mean, you never know what you're going to deal with, or what's going to get handed to you, or what's going to come your way.
Right. So, say somebody wanted to join NYPD, what would be your advice to them?
It's a different game from when I retired. I mean, things were changing 15 years ago when I got out. Now, I mean, it's totally different. I mean, the NYPD is definitely more customer service friendly when I was there. Now they're wearing body cams, which I used to think would be the worst thing in the world, but now it kind of proves the point that people act and behave like assholes, and the cops are just doing their best to do their jobs. Best advice: do what you're told. Keep your ears open and your mouth shut the first couple of years. If you want to work in a certain place, don't listen to the naysayers that are in the locker room. You know, it's funny. I remember there'd be guys in the locker room, you know, guys with more time than me, guys 10. We used to call them hairbags. A hairbag is an NYPD cop who's got numerous uniform deficiencies and is always complaining and griping in the locker room. And they'll never go anywhere because they're so used to their locker and reporting there every day, but they're miserable. And they're kind of toxic, and what are you putting in for that for? You'll never get it. Not to listen to people like that, because if you do, you'll become one of them. You'll never get out of your own way, and you'll drive around circles in a precinct for 20 years without getting to work in a specialized unit or do exciting or interesting things. You know, it's like, don't pigeonhole yourself because your father isn't a chief or a captain. Just, it's hard work, get good evaluations, and, you know, don't do stupid shit off duty. If someone, you know, if you're working with a guy who you think is going to get you jammed up, go get another partner. Don't be afraid to break that relationship with someone who you think is going to either A, get you in trouble, or B, get you bad evaluations.
That's pretty solid advice, I'd say. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, it's straight up a lot of the same stuff I tell my new guys that come in all the time. You know, keep your nose clean, have high integrity level, do what you're told.
Oh yeah, you come into a precinct, right? It's almost like prison. Going to an NYPD precinct is like prison, right? So an NYPD precinct has anywhere, the smaller precincts have 100 cops, the larger ones, like in Manhattan, have 300-400 cops, right? So every class, depending on manpower, a new precinct might get 30 cops, 30 rookies deposited in a precinct. The old timers look at you like you're from outer space. They want nothing to do with you because they don't know if you're going to be a know-it-all. They don't know if you're going to be a dry snitch. They don't know if you're a loudmouth. So it's like a dog. Like, they come up to you, they sniff you. And if you get stuck working with these old timers, they'll tell you, like in my day, the old timers would say, listen, kid, don't touch that fucking radio. I'll handle the radio when I'm driving. And that's it. He's going to, you know. So, and then you get like the fucked up guys that you later on, at first you think they're cool because, hey, kid, you want to get in the car with me? And then after a while you realize, yeah, this guy burns through partners because he's an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, he's only got like 3-4 years on me, but he's a total dick. That's why this guy goes through. Nobody wants to work with this guy. But when you're a rookie cop, you don't see it. You just think, oh, he's a nice guy, and oh, he bought me lunch. And then, you know, the next thing you know, the guy's got you signing him out a half hour early, or, you know, doing shit for him, like, you know, in prison, like doing their laundry or cutting into their commissary. It's the same thing. You got guys in there that'll take advantage of the rookies. There was this fucking old timer in a precinct. What he used to do is every year the rookies would come in, and in this precinct, there was no places to eat. It was like a burnt out shell. So the rookie cops never knew where to eat. So he would say, "Hey, you want a tuna sub? You want a tuna sub? Give me $5-6. I'll drop off your sandwiches." This guy would make sandwiches. He would collect their money. These cops looked like he was going to a deli. He basically makes sandwiches in the parking lot on the hood of his car, and then go out and deposit it to the cops.
That's great.
Always
Oh,
scams
man.
going on in fucking precincts and shit. I'm sure it hasn't changed. I'm sure if you drop me off at a precinct now, I can spot shit going on. You know what I mean?
Oh man.
Well, Vic, I've really enjoyed this interview. I'm sure we could sit here and talk for hours. But we try to keep it about an hour long. So if anybody wants to look you up, what all social media are you on?
So all my books, I've written, like I said, 4 NYPD books and 2 others. All my books are on Amazon. They're about 200 to 225 pages. I try to keep the price point down. My books are all my paperbacks are $10 or $2.99 ebook download. They're on Amazon. Just go on Amazon Books and type in Vic Ferrari. On social media, I have a Facebook page. Just type in Vic Ferrari. It's a picture of me from like 15 years ago in a police uniform. And on Instagram and Twitter, I'm at Vic Ferrari 50 if you want to get in touch with me.
All right, man. That sounds great. Again, I've really enjoyed this interview. I'm glad you was able to come on. I'm sure the paranormal questions are probably a little bit different than what you're used to, but hey,
no, not at all. I've been on a lot of, believe it or not, I've been on a lot of paranormal shows. One guy asked me, he goes, "Have you ever heard of an abduction or anything, in New York City?" I'm like, if there are UFOs, I don't think they want anybody from the Bronx.
Right. All right. So it wasn't that different for you. Like I said, when I found out about you, I was like, man, we got to get this guy on. We have the police connection with our name and Josh being in corrections, and we have a lot of officer friends. And I was like, I know this guy would be really interesting to talk to. When I told Josh, he's like, I've got to be on this interview. And so that's why I kind of let him take the lead, because I knew he would have way better questions than I would. So, all right, guys.
I appreciate the opportunity, guys. I really do.
Absolutely. All right, guys, that's going to about wrap it up for this episode. Go buy some of Vic's books. Check him out. I know his books have got to be amazing if he's just telling these crazy stories and amazing stories in this hour-long session we've just had. So give him a look up on social media, buy his books, and support him. I'm sure he's got some interesting stuff in those books too.
So appreciate you, Vic.
No, thank you.
All right, thank you, buddy.